Hello, welcome. You're watching the Scattered Guy, the show which is all about the mathematics, statistics, and game mechanics of Warhammer the Old World. Just a short video today, something a little bit different, but I wanted to talk about this analysis on some of the early game meta, which has been doing the rounds recently on social media. This has come out in the last sort of week or so. Being produced by Warhammer, who are a website aggregating lots of stats. They're following lots of tournaments, collecting those statistics, and providing some really interesting data on the game so far. And obviously, it's early days for the old world, but as we start to see things like this, people will obviously start looking to this data to start asking questions about game balance, and particularly asking questions about specific factions. Is my favourite faction a good faction? Is it a strong faction? Or am I going to be disadvantaged relative to other players? Uh, Inevitably, of course, over time, we will find that the game will, no game can be perfectly balanced. So there will be something in this. I want to say this isn't really meant to be an opinion piece about the meta. That's not really what this channel's about. Our focus is on using mathematics to answer, tactical questions about the game, particularly. Um, but I was really interested to see this because we can apply some of that same thinking and analysis to this kind of meta, just to kind of understand really what we're seeing here and how significant it is. So the first thing I really wanted to just draw on this is just to make the point it is still incredibly early days with this game. So this meta is dated 17th of March, so it's accurate up to that point. And the game itself obviously only launched on the 20th of January, so we're looking at effectively 2 months worth of data. And it's drawn obviously from some of the early tournaments that have happened, public tournaments where there is publicly available information on how different armies performed in those tournaments. So uh, there's obviously not been a huge number of events. It says on here 46 events, so it's not a tiny pool, but it's not a massive number of events compared to what we're going to see with the game over time as it develops. Is the first thing I would draw from that. The other thing I would draw from that is obviously 2 months into the game, everyone's still learning. We're learning in terms of the rules, and there's obviously various discussions. And I think we're expecting another FAQ from Games Workshop relatively soon, according to the rumours. Uh, but also, even within what we understand about the rules, players are still learning, with different factions, what works, what doesn't, what are the kind of situations that your army list is going to need to be designed to deal with. So it's probably very unlikely that what we're seeing right now is going to be representative long term of where the game settles, is the real key point to make there. The other thing I really wanted to draw out about this is just that actually we are looking at what is really quite a small data set, and this kind of meta and trying to build up a big picture of how balanced the game is only really works when you've got quite large data sets. You can't draw a conclusion just from a single game or a small number of games, or just from a single player's performance or a single list's performance, because it's not necessarily representative. Therefore, if an army is performing well or if it's performing not terribly well, is that down to something inherent in the faction? Is that down to the quality of the list and how that list is working? How that list is working, particularly against the specific opponents that are being played. Is it a player skill thing? Obviously, some players will be stronger than others. So we need quite a large data set over a very wide number of lists and of players before you can really start to draw any concrete conclusions with this kind of meta. Now, obviously, we're seeing here on the stats that we can see, Warhammer. They've obviously drawn a line. It says they've ignored factions which haven't met a minimum of 60 games played. So they're drawing a line at 60 games. Um, but actually, even 60 games, I mean, it's probably a sensible line to draw right now in terms of getting some early answers around this. But long term, that's obviously still a very small number of games. Obviously, if this is drawn from tournaments where people are likely to be playing, 5 or 6 games in a tournament, then 60 games, might only be 10 players. Or, I mean, it could be the same player in multiple tournaments. It might not even be 10 players. It might not even be 10 different lists. So there's not enough data there to sort of definitively calculate. That's not to say the statistics aren't useful or aren't valuable. It's just to understand the limitations to them. So where we've got vampire counts, for example, here on 85 games, that's probably only a dozen different lists and a dozen different players we're looking at. Even with Bretonia, 185 games played, we're probably potentially looking at maybe 25 to 50 different lists, possibly. And probably, if some of these tournaments, it might be the same players in multiple tournaments. It might be even fewer players. So the key there is just to understand this meta is almost certainly not going to be representative long term. It's not to say it's inaccurate or unuseful now. It's the best data we do have now, and it's great that we've got people like Warhammer aggregating these statistics. Just don't go too far in the conclusions you draw on it. The other question, I think, and a lot of the conversation around this on social media is about, are we already seeing examples of balance problems? Are we seeing factions which are particularly weak or particularly strong? So we can see here, I mean, Warhammer on this, in the footnotes, they suggested that 45 to 55% is the target win rate. Obviously, in a perfectly balanced game, if you had a 50%, if everybody was on 50%, that would be, across a big enough data set, that would be a perfectly balanced game. We're probably never going to see that. And that doesn't necessarily mean that there's a balance problem. It's just, there are so many variants and things to this game that are going to produce, a range. Warhammer is suggesting 45 to 55. I don't know necessarily where that comes from. Obviously, what we can see here is we've got a range from 38 with the dwarfs to 61% win rate with the Tomb Kings. And that does suggest that, currently the Tomb Kings seem to be winning slightly more. Not dramatically more, but slightly more than we might expect on average. And the dwarfs might be winning slightly less than we would expect on average. But actually, I think the positive take from this is we are absolutely not seeing that there are armies in this game that cannot win. It's not like dwarf players are coming to the battlefield and they're getting demolished every time. Actually, over a third of the time, the dwarf players are winning. And similarly, we're not seeing an army that's coming and it's just demolishing everyone and being absolutely dominant every time. Tomb Kings, they're winning slightly more than you might expect on average, but at 61%, that's certainly not dominant. So, actually what I would take from this, and given the caveats that it is very early meta, based upon a relatively small data set, is that actually this is reinforcing what we were all hoping for, which is that we've got quite a balanced game. So, yeah, that was my kind of 2 pence on this. I hope to be back shortly with my next proper video. I'm going to be having a look at one of the FAQs from the first set of FAQs that Games Workshop launched and answering a really interesting question around that. So do check that out. As always, if you've enjoyed this, please like the channel, subscribe, drop me a comment. It'd be great to hear from you. If you've got any questions, let me know. Thanks for watching.